Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to die before you ever truly lived? To touch the edge of eternity before your lungs filled with air? I have. My name is Layla, and I wasn't supposed to survive the day I was born. The umbilical cord was wrapped tightly around my neck, silencing my first cry before it ever escaped. I was declared stillborn, silent, motionless, and already gone. But while the doctors fought to bring me back, I was already somewhere else, somewhere light. I don't remember the room I was born in. I don't remember the frantic voices or the sterile air. But I remember the peace. It was the kind of peace that has no weight, no fear, no questions, just existence, soft, infinite, and filled with light. It wasn't like looking at a light or stepping into brightness. It was more like becoming it, dissolving into something larger than myself. There was no body, no form, just awareness and love. And in that space, I felt whole, I felt known, I felt eternal. There were no clocks ticking, no walls, no limits. I wasn't floating, I was just being wrapped in warmth, held by something greater than I could comprehend and yet intimately familiar. I couldn't see my parents, but I could feel them. I knew they were scared. I could sense their panic, their pleading prayers, but I wasn't afraid. I didn't belong to the fear, I belonged to the light. That world, whatever it was, felt like home, a home I didn't remember until I was there. It was as though I had returned to something I had never really left, like waking up from a dream, and realizing this was reality. I didn't want to go back. Why would I? Everything there made sense. Everything was love. But slowly the peace began to shift. I felt a pull, soft but insistent. Something was calling me back. I didn't want to listen. The transition was not gentle. It felt like being ripped through space, through sensation, through sound. One second I was everywhere and nowhere, and the next I was bound to a fragile, screaming body. The cold slapped me. The light was replaced by harsh fluorescence. The peace shattered into the mechanical rhythm of a hospital room. My lungs burned as they pulled in air for the first time. My skin, so new, felt the weight of life pressing down on it. It was loud, it was bright. It was wrong. I cried not because I was afraid, but because I had been forced back from a place I never wanted to leave. That first breath felt more like grief than triumph. The memory of the light faded, but it didn't vanish. It hid deep inside me like a song. I couldn't quite remember it, but hummed unconsciously in the quietest moments. As I grew older, I didn't recall the experience in detail. I didn't know to name it. A near-death experience, but I carried its echo inside me, buried beneath layers of childhood and time. My parents never told me what happened that day. Maybe they thought I was too young to understand. Maybe they didn't want to relive it, but I always knew something was different. I saw the world through a lens no one else seemed to have. I felt things more deeply noticed. Beauty in the mundane sensed emotions no one spoke aloud. I knew there was more than school, more than routines, more than the surface of things. There was something underneath it all. A presence, a memory, a light. Sometimes I would dream about floating, not like flying in the sky, but rising from everything. In these dreams, I would see places I had never visited, feel love from beings I didn't recognize, and wake up with tears on my cheeks and a longing I couldn't name. That longing stayed with me like a homesickness for somewhere that wasn't on any map. Even as a child, I sought silence more than sound. I felt safest in stillness, in the space where the world paused. Classical music spoke to me. Not just the melodies, but the moments in between the notes, the rests, the silence. That's where I found glimpses of the peace I had known. When others asked why I was so quiet, so dreamy, I couldn't explain that I was listening for something they couldn't hear, a memory of light just beneath the noise of living. And though I didn't understand it, then that silence was the same silence I had known in the light. The same vastness, the same love. I wasn't just drawn to beauty. I was looking for something I had already lost. Or maybe something I had been blessed to find too early and could never quite return to in the same way. My near-death experience was not something I chose. It was something gifted to me, carved into the core of my being before I had words, before I had form. It left a crack in the wall between worlds, and through that crack, the light still shone. That experience would shape everything, my empathy, my yearning, my path. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning, that the light I had once touched would return to me again and again in different forms each time, showing me more of who I truly was. That the journey between life and death wasn't a one-time passage, but a rhythm that echoed throughout a soul's lifetime. I didn't live because they saved me. I lived because something sent me back, something bigger than doctors or timing or chance. I had seen what waits on the other side, and it was not empty. It was everything. I was only 6 months old when I died for the second time. They told me later it was during a surgery meant to correct a condition in my skull. Something about premature fusion of the cranial sutures. I didn't understand the medical language. Of course not then, not now. What I do remember, though, has nothing to do with scalpels or stitches. I remember leaving my body again. Quietly, effortlessly, just like before. One moment I was wrapped in warm blankets under hospital lights, and the next I was floating, watching everything from above, untouched by fear, untouched by pain. My body lay still beneath the surgical lamps, but I was no longer inside it. I was somewhere else entirely. It wasn't darkness I entered, it was clarity. The moment my consciousness left my body, all the noise dropped away. The voices of doctors faded into silence. The beeping of machines dimmed into nothing. I was aware, deeply aware in a way I can't explain with human words. I watched the surgeons move their gloved hands, methodical and fast. I saw my parents standing outside the operating room. My mother clutching her hands so tightly, her knuckles turned white. My father's eyes were fixed on the red light above the door, as if staring at it could somehow force it to turn green. I felt their fear, but from a distance, I wasn't in it. I was simply observing it. And yet I wasn't just watching. I was sensing everything. The tension in the room, the love in the waiting, the ache in my mother's chest. I didn't have thoughts like I do now. It was more like waves of knowing moving through me. I didn't feel like a baby anymore. I didn't feel like anything with a name or age. I was just being. And in that being, I was surrounded again by that soft golden light. It didn't come from any direction. It was just everywhere. It wasn't bright like sunlight, nor did it blind me. It enveloped me, and it recognized me. That's the part that always sticks with me when I try to explain this near-death experience. It wasn't that I recognized the light. It's that it recognized me as if it had known me forever, as if I had returned to something that had always been waiting. I drifted farther from my body, pulled gently by something I couldn't see but trusted completely. There was no voice, no hand, no face, but I felt an invitation, not a command, an offer, as if the light itself were asking me, "Do you want to stay?" And everything in me said yes. Why would I want to return to a world of pain and cold air and tubes and separation when I could remain here in this realm of absolute peace where time didn't exist and nothing was missing? But something pulled me back, not a force, not a demand, more like a thread of purpose woven through my soul. It was as if the world I had left whispered, "Not yet." My body didn't call to me, but something beyond the physical did. Something that felt like promise, like unfinished pages in a story I hadn't written yet. And so I went back. The moment I re-entered my body, I felt it all. The weight, the discomfort, the noise, the pressure of skin against the cold air. It was like diving into a lake after floating among the stars. My limbs felt foreign. My eyes didn't want to open. Everything was sharp and unkind. My chest rose in a mechanical breath. Machines beeped louder. Hands touched me. But inside, I carried a stillness no one could see. I couldn't speak. I couldn't tell the nurses what I had seen or how peaceful it had been. But something changed in me that day. Even if no one else noticed, I became quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of deep attention. I started observing everything, noticing things most children didn't. I would stare at people's faces and know how they felt, even if they smiled. I could walk into a room and feel if someone had cried there recently. I didn't know how, I just did. It was as if I had kept part of that light with me, and it made the invisible more visible. My dreams became vivid after that. At 3 years old, I told my mother I dreamed of floating above the ceiling, where no one had to talk. I once described a place made of light, where I could feel music without hearing it. She thought it was my imagination. I knew better. These weren't dreams. They were memories, fragments of a realm I had been to twice before I could even walk. I started sensing a presence around me, especially at night. It wasn't scary. It was calming, as if something or someone was watching over me, not in a threatening way, but in a protective one. Sometimes I'd reach my hand out into the dark, hoping to touch whatever it was. I never did, but I always felt it. In quiet moments and soft music and the gentle sway of trees, I felt the same light I had known on that operating table. And though I didn't have the vocabulary for it yet, I somehow understood that light wasn't something I left behind. It had come back with me. The near-death experience didn't make me fear life. It made me question its boundaries. I knew deep down that death wasn't the end. I had crossed that threshold and returned not once but twice, and what I found on the other side was not terrifying. It was beautiful. It was real. More real than the walls around me, more real than the hands that fed me. That knowing shaped me. It made me different. As I got older, the world became louder, school, routine, distraction. But the silence remained inside me, like a secret room no one could enter but me. I began seeking stillness, craving solitude, sitting alone in fields just to hear the wind. The divine wasn't far away, it was everywhere in the breath, in the pause between words, in the space between heartbeats. I didn't need to leave my body to touch the light anymore. It lived in me. And so I learned to live with one foot in this world and one foot in another. I became a witness to both the seen and the unseen. I didn't understand it fully, then I still don't. But I know this: my second near-death experience wasn't an interruption. It was a reminder, a whisper from eternity telling me, "You're here for something more. Don't forget what you've seen." As I grew older, the memories of my near-death experiences faded into the background of my mind like dreams I couldn't quite remember but never really forgot. I didn't have words for what had happened to me, nor did I try to explain it. But deep inside, something had changed. It wasn't just what I had seen or felt. It was what I had become. My name was still Layla, but I no longer saw myself as just a girl growing up in the world. I was a quiet observer in the middle of noise, a soul walking through the illusion of time, carrying a truth too big for my age. I wasn't a normal child. I felt everything too much, too fast, too deeply. I knew when someone in the room was hurting. Even when they smiled, I sensed lies before they were spoken, felt tension in silence and joy in simple gestures. Others overlooked. Crowds overwhelmed me. Loud voices pierced me. But in nature, in music, in the quiet corners of the world, I felt at home. That's where the light whispered again, not like a voice, but like a feeling that moved through me. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see darkness. I saw warmth, movement, and memory. The memory of something I had touched but couldn't name. By the time I turned 10, I had already asked myself questions most adults were afraid to face. Why are we here? What happens when we die? What is this invisible presence I feel holding me when I'm alone? I didn't talk about it much. How could I? Who would believe that a child could remember a realm without time, a love without condition? I learned to carry the light quietly, like a flame cupped between two hands, protected from a world that didn't understand how easily it could go out. The older I got, the more I realized how few people around me had ever touched the peace I had known. They ran, rushed, chased it. Things: approval, success, distractions. They feared death as if it were a thief I couldn't relate. I didn't fear death. I feared forgetting the light. I feared losing the clarity I had known. The peace I carried inside felt like both a gift and a burden. A gift because it allowed me to see what others couldn't. A burden because it separated me. I felt old in a young body, and that dissonance, that spiritual mismatch made me ache in ways no one could see. But even in my loneliness, I was never truly alone. The light was always with me. I didn't always notice it, but I always felt it return when I needed it most. During moments of sadness, it would show up in a stranger's kindness. During moments of confusion, it would rise in the stillness of a quiet sunrise. I began to understand that the light I had once floated in wasn't somewhere far away. It was here beneath the surface of everything. And the more I slowed down, the more I felt it. At 13, I discovered meditation. Though I didn't know to call it that, I would sit by the window for hours watching the wind move through trees, feeling my breath, letting my mind go still. In those moments, I remembered not in flashes or visions, but in knowing I would feel the light again. Not as something from my past, but as something that was always present. And with it came a peace that nothing in the outside world could imitate. I began to write. Not stories or poems, but letters to something greater. I didn't know if it was God or the universe or the light itself. But I wrote as if someone was listening, and somehow I always felt heard. I never got words in return. Just calm, just presence. Just that familiar hum of silence that feels fuller than any sound. That was the light. That was my quiet near-death experience repeating itself in life, not through floating above my body, but through remembering I was more than it. As I stepped into my teenage years, the contrast between inner truth and outer world grew louder. School became harder. Not because of the work, but because I saw through it. I saw how lost people were, how disconnected they were from themselves. I watched my classmates seek validation, acceptance, distraction. I saw teachers drowning in stress and parents chasing achievements. And through it all, I just wanted to scream, "There's more than this." But I didn't. I stayed quiet. I observed. I waited. One night at 15, I had a dream, or maybe it was more than a dream. I found myself standing in the same golden light I had known as a baby. It wrapped around me, and this time I didn't float. I walked. The ground beneath me shimmered with each step. I wasn't alone. Beside me walked a being made entirely of light. No face, no form, just presence. It didn't speak, but I felt its message. You are not here to escape the world. You are here to remember it. I woke up crying, not from fear. From relief, I finally understood. My near-death experiences weren't accidents. They were invitations. Invitations to live differently, to see differently, to love differently. I wasn't meant to carry the light like a secret. I was meant to live it, to bring it into this world, not run from it. From that day on, I stopped asking why I had returned. I stopped wondering what was wrong with me for being so sensitive. I realized my sensitivity was a doorway. My silence was a bridge. My questions were not flaws. They were maps leading me back to the light again and again. And though I would go on to face trials, pain, and moments of doubt, I knew something most people didn't, that we are more than flesh, that we are not alone, that death is not the end, that the light we seek is already within us. My near-death experiences gave me more than insight. They gave me purpose. They gave me the courage to walk through life as a witness, as a channel, as a living reminder of what waits beyond and within. By the time I turned 23, the weight of carrying so much unspoken awareness had become unbearable. I had spent most of my life feeling like a guest in the physical world, quietly holding on to memories of something no one around me believed existed. My near-death experiences had opened a doorway, but they didn't hand me a manual. I was lost, not because I didn't know who I was, but because I knew exactly who I was, and that truth didn't fit the world I lived in. I felt fractured, one part of me rooted in divine remembrance, the other trying to survive the noise of modern life. I was constantly overwhelmed by people's pain, their expectations, their hunger for validation. Everywhere I turned, people were seeking something, yet no one seemed to know what it was. I recognized the look in their eyes. I had seen it in myself. It was the look of a soul that had forgotten where it came from. Outwardly, I appeared calm. I smiled. I held conversations. I worked. But inside, something was slowly breaking. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a quiet unraveling, like a thread pulling loose from the fabric of everything I had tried to stitch together. I began fasting, hoping to reset something in me. I stopped eating, not to punish myself, but to quiet the distractions I wanted to hear again. To feel again, I remembered the stillness of the light, and I craved it with every cell in my body. On the 7th day of fasting, my hands trembled, my lips were cracked, and my thoughts had become a gentle blur. I wasn't in pain, I was drifting. That evening, as the sun disappeared and the air grew cool, I collapsed. There was no warning. One moment I was walking across the room, and the next I was falling slowly like a leaf leaving a tree. My body hit the floor, but I didn't feel the impact. I had left it behind. I was outside of myself again, but this time something was different. It wasn't a rush or a flash, it was a return. I floated in a familiar light, softer than before, more like a breath than a beam. I wasn't just surrounded by it, I was made of it. My consciousness expanded. I could see not just the room below, but the years that had brought me here. Every decision, every ache, every prayer. They unfolded around me like petals blooming in reverse. I wasn't watching a timeline, I was becoming it. I could feel the intention behind every event, every moment of confusion, every unanswered question. Nothing had been wasted. Everything had been part of the unfolding. The light embraced me, and in that embrace, I felt no shame, no regret, only deep understanding. I remembered what it was like to be free, not just from my body, but from fear, doubt, and time. There were other beings there too, not people, not spirits in the traditional sense, but intelligences, awareness, love with shape. One of them approached, and though it had no face, I recognized it. The presence was feminine, warm, ancient. She didn't speak, but I understood her. I asked questions, not with words, but with desire. Why is there suffering? What is my purpose? Why do we forget who we are? The answers came like waves, not as explanations, but as knowing suffering. I understood was not punishment. It was a portal, a stripping away of illusion, a calling home. Purpose was not a destination, but a state of being alignment. Integrity, truth, and forgetfulness was a part of the game we agreed to play. We are born into forgetting so that when we remember, the remembering is real. The love we seek is the love we are, and the journey is never about arriving. It's about waking up to what was always within. As I drifted deeper into the light, I saw a figure. At first, it was only presence, then form. It was my grandfather. He had died when I was very young, and I had few memories of him. But here I felt everything, his essence, his gentleness, his unwavering love. He didn't speak, he simply stood beside me facing the same light. I realized that even in death, we don't lose people. We return to them. We meet again, not in form but in truth, in unity. And then behind the light, something emerged. Brighter, larger, more complete. It wasn't an image, it was a presence that filled everything. I knew instantly it was Christ. Not the version painted on church walls, but the essence, pure love without condition, without hierarchy. He radiated understanding. I didn't kneel. I didn't worship. I simply stood there feeling the fullness of his being, and in his presence, I understood forgiveness. Not as pardon, but as wholeness, as remembering we were never separate to begin with. I don't know how long I was there. There was no time, only depth, but at some point I felt the shift again. The call to return I resisted. I cried not with tears, but with soul. Why would I go back to pain, to confusion, to hunger? But the answer came quietly, because someone there needs to remember. Just like you did. And with that, I was pulled back into my body, not gently but urgently. My chest rose, air burned through my throat. My muscles screamed, my heart thundered in my ears. The light was gone, the floor was cold, my body ached, but my soul remembered. This time it wasn't a question. It was a knowing I had experienced yet another near-death experience. And this one hadn't just awakened me, it had chosen me. In the days that followed, I couldn't eat much. My body was slow to adjust, but my awareness was sharper than ever. Everything I touched carried texture. Every voice held layers. I walked through the world as if I were seeing it for the first time, and in many ways I was. The people around me didn't know what had happened. But I did. Something in me had died, or maybe something in me had finally come alive. That journey, fasting, collapsing, rising again, wasn't an accident. It was a surrender, a letting go of who I thought I needed to be, to remember who I truly was. The light I had once floated in wasn't waiting for me in death. It was inside me now and always. My near-death experience didn't end when I opened my eyes. It lives on in every breath I take, in every act of love, in every moment of stillness. I offer the world. And so I walk now, not searching, not fearing, but remembering. The light walks with me. Waking up after my third near-death experience was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't like waking from sleep. It was more like slamming back into the world. My body was sore, my skin cold, my breath shallow. The light that had embraced me just moments before was gone, replaced by the harsh weight of gravity and the sterile hum of my small apartment. I opened my eyes to the dim light flickering through the window blinds, but I felt like I was seeing through a filter, everything too loud, too fast, too sharp. The contrast between that divine silence and this noisy return was jarring, like being pulled from a symphony and dropped into static. I wasn't ready. But I was back. I lay on the floor for hours, unmoving, half in this world, half still, drifting in memory. My body ached from the fall, from the fasting, from the return, but my soul was glowing. I had seen something again, felt it. And no matter how heavy my limbs were, no matter how foreign it felt to be wrapped in skin again, I carried something with me this time, not just memory, but clarity, not just understanding, but mission. The near-death experience hadn't just reminded me of the light, it had shown me who I was inside it. For the first few days, I could barely eat. My senses were heightened. Music brought me to tears. Wind brushing against my arm made me shiver with emotion. I couldn't explain it to anyone. I didn't try. How could I describe what it's like to be embraced by infinite love and then return to deadlines and dishes? I moved through the world slowly, as if learning to walk again, as if the very ground beneath my feet had changed texture. And maybe it had, or maybe it was me. I started noticing patterns, small synchronicities, a bird landing beside me when I felt doubt. A song playing the exact words I needed to hear. Strangers offering a smile at the exact moment I felt invisible. These weren't coincidences, they were echoes. Ripples of the light reminding me I wasn't alone even in the mundane. The divine wasn't only waiting on the other side, it was here in every breath. If I stayed awake enough to see it, but returning didn't mean peace. In fact, it meant confrontation with myself, with my fears, with all the things I had been avoiding. When I was out of my body, everything made sense. But back here, my doubts came crawling. Was it real? Did I imagine it? Was I just sick, delusional, desperate for meaning? These questions haunted me more than death ever did, and still in the quiet hours when I sat with my hand over my heart, I knew the truth. I didn't need anyone to validate it. I had lived it. I had died into it. I began journaling everything, the sensations, the symbols, the emotions that lingered. It was like decoding a sacred language that had no alphabet. I wrote about the feminine light being, about the presence of Christ, about my grandfather's silent companionship. These weren't hallucinations, they were more real than any conversation I'd had in the physical world. They hadn't spoken in words, but in essence, and now it was my task to give them voice. As I wrote, memories returned, memories I didn't realize I had. Moments from childhood where I had felt the same light, where I had seen shadows move not with fear, but with invitation. I remembered floating above my crib. I remembered reaching towards something no one else could see. These weren't fantasies. They were fragments of my earliest truths. Resurfacing after years buried beneath expectation and routine, the hardest part of returning was the loneliness. Not because I was physically alone, I wasn't, but because I couldn't share what had happened. Not really. How do you explain to someone that death welcomed you, that eternity felt more like home than the city you lived in? That the most real moment of your life happened when your body stopped working? People want to hear about bright tunnels and angel choirs, but the near-death experience wasn't a story I could summarize. It was a transformation I was still living through. And yet in that loneliness, I found something unexpected: strength. The light hadn't given me answers to avoid the pain. It had given me the capacity to hold it, to sit with discomfort, to walk through grief, to not escape life but embrace it fully. Shadows and all, because in those shadows, the light reveals itself again and again. I began speaking more gently, listening more deeply, moving more slowly. I no longer felt the urge to rush through life. I wanted to savor it, to witness it. I watched people argue and felt the pain beneath their words. I saw people chasing dreams and understood the emptiness driving them. I didn't judge them. I recognized them. I had been them. Maybe I still was, but now I could see another layer, a deeper rhythm behind the noise, and that changed everything. I started helping others, not as a healer, not as a teacher, but as a mirror. I would sit with friends who were going through breakups or depression and say nothing, just be present, and somehow something in that stillness would shift the air. They would cry, they would soften, they would say, "I don't know why I feel safe with you," and I would smile because I knew I wasn't giving them anything new. I was simply reflecting the light that had always been inside them. In time, I realized that returning wasn't about resuming life where I left off. It was about beginning again, living from a new place, letting the light guide me. In the small moments, how I speak, how I choose, how I love, I stopped needing to prove myself. I stopped needing to be understood. I just wanted to live in truth, even if it meant walking alone sometimes. My near-death experience didn't give me a map, it gave me a compass, a quiet, unwavering pull toward the sacred that lives in everything. It taught me that being alive isn't the opposite of dying. It's the opportunity to remember, to embody, to shine. And so I keep walking, not toward anything, but with everything. Every step a return, every breath a remembering. I was brought back for a reason, not to escape death, but to live life as someone who has seen beyond it. And now that I've seen it, I see it everywhere. Coming back to life didn't mean going back to how things were. It meant learning how to live again with eyes that had seen the infinite. Every ordinary moment now shimmered with meaning, and every silence pulsed with something I couldn't name. I had returned to a world that hadn't changed, but I had. My near-death experiences had opened a window, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't close it. Nor did I want to, because through it, I saw the truth. A truth I could no longer deny. I began to feel energy, not metaphorically, not spiritually, tangibly. I would walk into a room and feel whether it was light or heavy. Sometimes I would feel a wave of emotion wash over me that wasn't mine. Grief, joy, anxiety, only to discover someone nearby had just experienced that very feeling. I realized I was tuning into something that had always been there, but I had never had the language to explain it. This was not imagination. It was perception, expanded perception. A lingering gift of my near-death experience, I started to explore it slowly at first with curiosity rather than fear. I'd sit in meditation not to quiet my thoughts, but to open a door. A door inward where silence became a language and stillness became a path. With time, I discovered something extraordinary. The energy I felt in meditation was the same energy I had floated in when I was outside my body. That presence, that light, that love. It wasn't only waiting on the other side of death, it was here. It had always been here. The only difference was my awareness. Once I realized this, everything shifted. I no longer sought connection in the external world. I found it in the spaces between. In the pause between breaths, in the silence between words. I began practicing what I called active stillness, a state of presence where I wasn't doing anything, but I was completely awake to everything. And in those moments, I felt the divine move through me, not as an idea, but as a current. A real, undeniable presence flowing through my chest, down my arms, through my fingertips. It was like remembering how to listen with your whole body. Sometimes during these meditations, I'd feel others around me. Beings I couldn't see, but whose presence I recognized. They weren't ghosts or spirits in the Hollywood sense. They were subtle presences, calm, supportive, observant. I felt no fear, only recognition. It was as if they were guides gently watching, not interfering, only reminding, and sometimes in the deepest states I'd feel a familiar warmth. The same warmth I had felt wrapped around me during each near-death experience. It didn't say anything. It didn't have to. It was the same eternal love quietly waiting beneath the surface of life. This connection extended beyond silence. I began to see signs, patterns in nature, repeating numbers, phrases from strangers that echoed something I had been silently questioning. I began to trust the synchronicities. Life was speaking to me, not in sentences, but in alignment, and the more I trusted, the more fluid life became. Struggles still came, but I no longer resisted them. I met them with awareness, asking, "What are you trying to teach me?" My relationships changed. Some people faded away, unable to understand the path I was walking, but others arrived souls who resonated with the same frequency, people who had their own experiences with death loss. Light, I found community not in crowds, but in quiet hearts. We didn't need to speak much, we understood. We had touched the same mystery, and that was enough. The most profound connection, though, was with myself. I had spent years feeling disconnected from my own body, as if it was something I was borrowing. But now I began to see it differently. My body wasn't a cage, it was a vessel, a bridge, a sacred tool that allowed my soul to express and create in this world. I started treating it with reverence. I walked barefoot more. I ate slowly. I listened to what it needed. And as I honored it, I noticed that the same energy I had met in the light now lived in my breath, in my heartbeat, in my touch. I also began to sense the emotions of others with a strange clarity, not in a dramatic way, just a gentle knowing. I'd speak to someone and feel their sadness before they admitted it. I could tell when someone was hiding pain or radiating joy. This sensitivity was a gift, but also a responsibility. It taught me to listen deeply, not only to what people said, but to what their energy whispered. I never called it intuition, it was remembrance. I was simply remembering what it meant to be connected to myself, to others, to something greater. Sometimes I'd question my sanity. Was I imagining all this? Was it wishful thinking, but then the feeling would return, the undeniable hum of peace in my chest, the way my body would vibrate during meditation, the soft presence that showed up when I was still enough to feel it. This wasn't illusion, it was truth, subtle, quiet, often overlooked, but real. People began coming to me for help, though I never advertised anything. They said they felt calm around me, that I helped them see things clearly. I didn't do anything special. I just listened. I held space, and perhaps in doing that, I gave them permission to feel what they had been avoiding, to remember what they had forgotten. I wasn't healing anyone. I was simply allowing the light to flow through me, just like it had flowed through me during my near-death experience. Over time, I began to see life itself as a conversation, a dialogue between the seen and unseen, and the more present I became, the clearer the conversation grew. I didn't need to wait for another brush with death to feel connected. The veil had been lifted. The connection was already here. I just needed to remain open. I now wake each day not asking, what should I do, but what is life trying to show me? I move not with urgency, but with alignment. I don't chase meaning. I notice it. In the way a flower opens in the rhythm of footsteps in the eyes of a stranger, the sacred is everywhere. I just had to slow down enough to see it. My near-death experiences didn't end when I came back. In a way, they were only the beginning. They were not isolated events, but awakenings, points of return that peeled back the illusion and showed me what had always been true. The divine isn't hidden. It's simply quiet, waiting, and the moment I chose to listen, everything changed. For a long time, I thought the light was only meant for me, that what I had seen, what I had touched beyond the veil was a private treasure I had to guard. But slowly, something began to shift. The more I sat in silence, the more I listened, the more I realized the light was never mine to keep. It was a gift meant to be shared. My near-death experiences weren't just about my transformation. They were about connection, about remembering together. It began with one person, a woman I met at a local support group, not for spiritual seekers, but for people navigating grief. Her husband had passed just a few months prior. She looked fragile, but held herself with a kind of quiet strength I recognized. When she spoke, her voice trembled, not just from emotion, but from something deeper, something raw and spiritual. After the meeting ended, I felt a pull to stay behind. We sat alone in folding chairs in the dim hall. She told me she hadn't dreamed since the night he died, that silence haunted her more than his absence. I didn't offer advice. I didn't try to fix her pain. I simply looked at her and said, "Maybe he hasn't left. Maybe you've just gone quiet in the places he visits." Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't ask what I meant. She simply nodded. In that moment, I realized that my presence, my awareness was doing something. It was helping people remember something they couldn't quite name. And I wasn't doing it through words or teachings, I was doing it through being. After that, more people began to cross my path. Strangers would open up to me on buses, in waiting rooms, and grocery lines. I started to notice the patterns. Each person was on the edge of something. A loss, a beginning, a quiet spiritual awakening, and they needed to speak, not to be taught, but to be witnessed. I became a witness, not of pain, but of light peeking through the cracks. And somehow the memory of my near-death experiences gave me the strength to hold that space without needing to fill it. I remember sitting with a young man once, just 21, who had survived an overdose. His hands shook as he described the moment he stopped breathing. He said, "There was light, but I don't think I deserved it." I reached out, touched his hand, and said, "The light isn't about deserving, it's about remembering." He broke down sobbing. He had never told anyone what he'd seen. And yet here we were, two strangers connected by something beyond language. Each time I shared a little more of my story, something opened in the person sitting across from me. Not belief, not agreement, but recognition. Like the light inside them was nodding back at mine. I began to understand that the real miracle wasn't the near-death experience itself. It was what had awakened the knowing that lives inside all of us. My role wasn't to convince anyone. It was simply to help them feel safe enough to remember. There were moments of doubt, of course, times. I questioned whether I was making a difference or simply projecting meaning onto coincidence, but then inevitably someone would find me again. A grieving father, a curious teenager, a retired nurse with quiet eyes and a trembling voice, and they'd say something like, "I've never told anyone this, but..." And every time I'd listen. And every time I'd feel the same soft presence enter the space between us. The light. Eventually I started guiding small groups, nothing formal, just gatherings in living rooms or quiet corners of parks. We wouldn't meditate or chant, we'd just sit, breathe. share what we'd felt but never voiced, and in those circles, something sacred always emerged. People would cry without shame, laugh without fear. They'd describe dreams, flashes of memory, unexplainable peace in the middle of chaos. Some had never had a near-death experience, but all had touched something divine, and they didn't need to die to find it. I realized that what I had experienced was not unique. It was universal. The details were mine, yes, but the essence belonged to everyone. We were all walking around with veils over our eyes, waiting for something to tear them open. For me, that tearing happened through physical death. For others, it happened through heartbreak, loss, stillness, or simply a moment of pure awe. The point wasn't how we found the light. The point was what we did once we remembered it was there. I stopped thinking of myself as someone who had crossed over and started thinking of myself as someone who had remembered how to feel. Because the truth is, the light isn't somewhere else. It's in the way we look at each other, in the way we sit with pain, in the way we choose presence over distraction. Sharing my near-death experience wasn't about telling a story. It was about holding a mirror, reflecting what was already true for everyone. One evening, a woman who had attended one of my gatherings stayed behind. She was quiet the whole time, but as we cleaned up the space, she turned to me and said, "You helped me forgive my son. He died last year and I've been so angry. But tonight, I felt him in the room." She didn't ask if it was real. She didn't need confirmation. She simply knew, and so did I. That's when I truly understood the greatest gift of the near-death experience was not survival. It was the ability to help others live, not by giving them answers, but by helping them remember the light they had always carried, the light they were made of. I no longer chase meaning. I embody it in how I sit with a friend, in how I smile at a stranger, in how I stay silent long enough to feel what's truly happening. The connection I once thought was a private miracle has become the thread that weaves me into the lives of others. And every time someone says, "I feel like I've known you forever," I smile, because in truth they have. We've all known each other, in the light beyond the veil, before the forgetting, and now in this life we remember together. There came a moment not marked by fireworks or divine thunder, but a still unmistakable revelation that changed how I saw everything. I was sitting alone on a bench in the park, just watching leaves fall when something clicked inside me. Not a thought, not an idea, but a knowing. As if the invisible threads connecting all things had suddenly become visible. My near-death experiences had shown me glimpses of truth, but this was different. This was the big picture settling into my bones. It wasn't a single realization. It was more like a curtain slowly being pulled back, revealing a vast, intricate design that had always been there. I saw the beauty in the heartbreak, the intelligence in the chaos, the meaning behind every detour I had once cursed. It all made sense, not in the way a formula makes sense, but in the way a symphony makes sense when you hear it as one complete movement rather than scattered notes. Every pain, every loss, every unanswered prayer was not a mistake. It was a brushstroke in something far more profound than I had ever imagined. For most of my life, I had seen suffering as a flaw, something wrong with the system, something we had to fix or escape. But now I saw it differently. Suffering was not the opposite of grace. It was part of it, the doorway through which light entered. The invitation to go deeper, I remembered in vivid detail how each near-death experience had come after a period of pain, confusion, or surrender. And in each one, I hadn't been punished. I had been held, cradled in light, love beyond comprehension. That wasn't just mercy, that was design. I looked around the park and suddenly nothing looked ordinary anymore. The child chasing pigeons, the couple arguing in low voices, the elderly man feeding breadcrumbs to a pigeon. They were all sacred, their stories, their tears, their silences. All of it was holy. I wasn't looking at random lives. I was witnessing different expressions of the same divine unfolding. We weren't here to win or prove anything. We were here to remember, to feel, to grow, and to return again and again to the light we came from. That afternoon changed something in me permanently. I stopped searching for the next awakening. I stopped needing another sign. The signs were everywhere. Life itself was the message. Every moment, even the ones I used to label boring or painful, was infused with the same energy I had felt on the other side. My mission wasn't to escape this world. It was to embody what I had seen beyond it. From that day forward, I lived differently. Not dramatically. I didn't quit my job or move to the mountains, but I breathed differently, listened differently, Walked through my day with the awareness that everything, absolutely everything, was part of a sacred dance. I made eye contact with strangers longer. I let myself cry when I needed to laugh, when I felt joy without shame, and be still without guilt. I no longer needed to know how everything would work out. I trusted that it would. I began sharing more openly with others, not in a preachy way, but with quiet confidence. I told them not only about my near-death experience, but about what it had taught me about living. I didn't focus on the light I saw or the figures I met. I focused on the wisdom it left behind, that pain doesn't mean abandonment, that silence is sometimes the most loving answer, that the soul's growth often looks like falling apart before it looks like blossoming. People listened not because I spoke eloquently, but because I spoke from a place they recognized in themselves. A place they had maybe ignored or forgotten, but one that lit up when they heard truth. I watched people soften, not because I gave them answers, but because I gave them permission to question differently, to see differently, to hold their life like a mystery to be trusted instead of a puzzle to be solved. The more I leaned into this way of being, the more grace I noticed. Doors opened when I stopped forcing them. People appeared when I stopped chasing. Healing came when I stopped resisting the hurt, and most of all, I stopped fearing death. Not because I knew what came next in perfect detail, but because I had touched what came before, and that gave me peace. The big picture, I realized, isn't something you grasp intellectually. It's something you feel when you surrender, when you stop needing to control everything and instead begin to participate in it fully, to love what is, to honor the mess as much as the miracle. That was the truth my near-death experiences had been pointing to all along. Not that heaven is far away, but that heaven is in the way we see. I began writing more intentionally letters to the universe, journal entries to my soul. Even poetry, I never planned to share. The more I wrote, the more I discovered that wisdom doesn't come from effort. It comes from presence, from allowing yourself to be fully here in this body, in this breath, while also knowing you are not confined to it. That paradox that we are infinite and fragile at the same time became my compass. Eventually, I returned to that same park bench where it all clicked. I sat quietly watching the trees sway in the wind, and I whispered aloud, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to life, to the breath, to the knowing that now lived in every cell of my being. I wasn't waiting for more experiences. I wasn't chasing the next transformation. I was simply living as someone who had been touched by the eternal and now knew how to see it in the ordinary. My journey hasn't been linear. There are days I forget, days I fall back into fear or doubt, but even then the light is never gone. It's only waiting to be remembered. And that's what I've come to trust most, that every single one of us is on the same path home. Some of us just get glimpses sooner. Some of us are asked to carry the memory longer, but none of us are left out. The big picture holds us all. I always believed the end of my story would arrive with some dramatic moment. A flash of light, a voice from the sky, a final revelation that wrapped everything in clarity. But what I discovered was something far quieter. The most profound endings come in the form of surrender. Not a grand display, but a breath. A knowing. My final near-death experience didn't end with a prophecy. It ended with purpose. I wasn't sent back to explain heaven. I was sent back to live Earth differently. And to do that, I had to bring the light with me, not in memory alone, but in action, in how I showed up, in how I listened, and in how I loved. At first, I thought I had been chosen for something special, but eventually I understood I wasn't chosen to be more than anyone else. I was chosen to become a mirror to reflect what is already within every single soul. The light doesn't make you special, it makes you humble. It strips away the illusions, the ego, the need to be right, and leaves only truth. The kind of truth that burns quietly but endlessly, the kind of truth that can't be preached, only lived. After returning from that final edge, I no longer sought answers. I didn't need to know the meaning of life. I needed to embody it. And I realized it wasn't about having all the wisdom, it was about becoming the space where others could find their own. The more I allowed myself to just be, the more others began to open around me. People told me things they'd never told anyone. I became a witness, not because I had all the answers, but because I was willing to stand in their questions without fear. I knew what it was like to feel alone in your pain. I also knew what waited on the other side of that silence. I stopped trying to guide people with advice. Instead, I guided them with presence that became my new language presence. That stillness I had touched during each near-death experience had never really left. It lived in me now, and the more I tuned into it, the more I could offer it to others. When someone cried, I didn't try to cheer them up. I sat with them. When someone was angry, I didn't try to fix it. I listened, because sometimes healing doesn't come through words. It comes through being seen, truly seen. And in that sacred space, I witnessed transformation. Not the kind you post about or put on a stage, but quiet revolutions of the soul. A mother forgiving herself, a man forgiving his father, a young woman choosing to stay alive after thinking she couldn't take one more day. I didn't save them, I simply reminded them that the light they thought they had lost was never gone. It was only waiting. One day, I stood in front of a small group of people gathered not in a church, not in a temple, but in a circle under the open sky. I didn't preach. I didn't quote scripture. I just told my truth that I had died, that I had left my body, that I had felt something beyond words. Love so pure, it dissolved me. Clarity so deep, it silenced every question and connection. So whole, it made loneliness impossible. And then I told them the most important part. You don't have to die to feel this. You can feel it now. If you allow yourself to stop, to feel. To remember, that moment was when I realized why I had returned. My life was not meant to be a spotlight. It was meant to be a doorway. I wasn't here to be followed. I was here to open a path inside others so they could follow the truth already within them. And in doing that, I understood something so simple, it felt like lightning. We are not here to escape life. We are here to bring light to it. If you're listening now, know this. My story is not a story of death. It's a story of becoming alive. The near-death experience is just the name we give to the moment when we stop pretending and start remembering. And maybe you haven't floated above your body. Maybe you haven't walked through tunnels of light or met celestial beings. That doesn't matter. What matters is whether you've had a moment. Just one where the noise stopped and you felt something deeper calling you. If you have, then you've already touched the edge. You've already begun. So let me offer you this. You don't need to wait for crisis to live with presence. You don't need to wait for loss to appreciate what you have. You don't need to die to know that you are made of something eternal. You only need to choose love over fear, forgiveness over judgment, stillness over distraction. This is the invitation the light gave me, and now I'm passing it on to you. Let's pause here. Let's breathe together. Let's stop looking for something out there and start recognizing the divine right here in your breath, in your being in this exact moment. Now allow me to step out of Layla's story for a moment and speak to you directly from me as the one bringing you this video. If Layla's journey touched something inside you, if it stirred a memory, a hope, a truth you've almost forgotten, then don't let it stop here. Stories like this are not just meant to be heard. They're meant to be carried, passed on, remembered. So I invite you, share this video with someone who's searching, with someone who's hurting, with someone who needs to remember the light. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep exploring these sacred truths through real stories of transformation. And if you've had your own moment, your own awakening, your own encounter with the infinite, tell us in the comments. Let your story become a lantern for someone else's path. The light doesn't belong to a few. It belongs to all of us, and every time we speak from that light, we give others permission to shine too. Thank you for walking this journey with us, and remember, you are the light. Now go and live like it.